What our correspondent in Pristina saw of the bombing aftermath. The Lawrence suspects break their silence. And Chelsea have it all to do after first leg of semi-final.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. NATO announced today that it's sending 8,000 ground troops to Albania to help with the humanitarian aid effort for the refugees from Kosovo. The numbers are still growing, swelled by 10,000 thrown out by Macedonia. There had been concern for their safety, but the Red Cross said today all the missing had now been located in Albania. ITN's Mark Austin reports from there.
These are the people no one wants, forced at gunpoint from their homes in Kosovo, then kicked out of Macedonia, the country where they were begging for sanctuary but didn't get it. Instead, they were rounded up in the middle of the night, put on buses and dumped across the border with Albania. On this journey of misery, they have now reached Korça in southeast Albania, a town that can't afford to look after them in a country that can't possibly cope. But at least here they are getting some help, local aid workers distributing the meagre food supplies they have. But food, blankets and medicine are scarce. Such is the desperate need of these people that NATO ground troops are on their way to try and ease the plight of the refugees.
The strain on Albania is growing by the day. The poorest country in Europe is now home to more than 300,000 Kosovo refugees. It is a humanitarian catastrophe that NATO didn't plan for, but one which they now have to urgently tackle.
And as if things are not bad enough, reports reaching here tonight say at least another 50,000 refugees are on their way. Mark Austin, ITN, Albania.
There's still grave concern that the thousands trying to flee Kosovo, who were turned back when Yugoslavia closed its borders, could now be used as human shields. Even those now safe in NATO camps in Macedonia are being told they can't stay long. This report is by Tim Hewitt.
There is at last some sense of order in the handling of the refugees here. Families are finally being registered, and their dispersal to countries abroad now seems a little less like deportation. Nevertheless, there remains widespread unease over the apparent indifference of the Macedonian authorities. Armed soldiers have been deployed inside NATO-run refugee camps, giving the feeling of forced confinement. And there remain questions about what happened to the thousands herded away from this border camp 2 nights ago. The border is closed, and on the Serb-controlled side, lines of abandoned cars have been left behind by people apparently ordered to go back home. Serb border guards were not welcoming visitors. The Macedonians have been alarmed by this sudden influx of refugees. They worry about the pressures on their struggling economy, and more importantly, about the ethnic balance in a country where there is already a sizable Albanian minority. In this camp, British soldiers are distributing food, taking on the sort of duties that Macedonia has always argued should be NATO's responsibility. And it wants the camps to be cleared as soon as possible. If the Kosovar Albanians are to be welcomed anywhere, it will not be here. Tim Hewitt, ITN, Macedonia.
The war in Kosovo has reduced much of the provincial capital Pristina to ruins. Our correspondent Julian Mannion was taken there yesterday, and here's his full report, which has been monitored by Serbian security officials.
It was the first time that the authorities have allowed us into Pristina since the NATO campaign began. It was a brief visit that allowed just a glimpse of the terrible events of the last 2 weeks. On Tuesday night, the centre of the city was blasted by a powerful NATO airstrike. Bombs ploughed through the roof of the central post office, causing part of the building to collapse and cutting most telephone services. Local government buildings were also heavily damaged, and nearby an area of civilian housing was wrecked. We found what looked like 2 large bomb craters among the smashed homes, and Serb officials say that at least 10 people died here. This is what the Serbian authorities wanted us to see: heavy bomb damage in the center of Pristina. To get here, we had to drive through a once bustling Albanian district of the city, which I remember well from previous visits. Today, it is virtually deserted. On the outskirts of Pristina, we were shown a vast fresh crater in the middle of a cemetery, apparently caused by a bomb that missed an army barracks 100 yards away. Just how much damage has been inflicted on the Yugoslav army is unknown, but the troops we saw and were unable to film are well dispersed and seem to be preparing for a long campaign. Julian Mannion, ITN, Pristina.
NATO today denied that it was responsible for all that damage and claimed it had been orchestrated by Serbian forces. It's still intensifying its bombing and said it now considered Serb TV and radio a legitimate target. Robert Moore reports.
As the American Defense Secretary William Cohen toured the main NATO airbase in Italy, it is becoming clear the West is bracing itself for the long haul in its air war against Yugoslavia. Already into week 3, and the Americans will soon be adding to the air power available to NATO commanders. And the rhetoric against Belgrade is being stepped up.
Mr. Milosevic, as you all have seen, has carried all of us into the heart of darkness. He and his hooded thugs are going through and destroying the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. They are engaging in rape, pillage, and mass murder on a scale that we have not seen since the end of World War II.
NATO has released cockpit video showing strikes on military targets, like this ammunition dump.
The bombs coming in now.
As well as on an armoured vehicle. Next on the target list will be Serb television and radio stations, to counter what some NATO officials are calling the dangerous tools warping Serb opinion. NATO has also announced that next week a further 8,000 soldiers, including some British troops, will be sent to Albania to help with the humanitarian relief effort. So, despite official denials they will have a combat role, the number of Western soldiers in the Balkans is now rapidly mounting. Robert Moore, ITN, at the Ministry of Defence.
Now the other news. The 5 young men who've been accused of the murder of the black teenager Stephen Lawrence appeared on ITV tonight. All were asked if they were guilty. Joe Andrews heard how they answered.
The main suspects in the Stephen Lawrence murder broke their silence tonight for the first time in 6 years. All 5 were questioned in detail about their movements that night and the scenes filmed on the police surveillance video.
But if you want to cut someone, you just put that bit on their face and go.
You're practising cutting someone there, aren't you?
Yeah, I think all teenagers go through that phase. I'm not saying to that extreme, because that, whatever, you can put it how you like, but all teenagers do it.
But you're almost giving your friend a sort of lesson, an evening class in how to stab someone.
I mean, take it.
You show him how to penetrate in the arm of the armchair, then you show him how to cut the face.
You can call it what you like. It's just mocking, it's just messing about.
3 of the men give conflicting versions about what happened on the night of the murder, but all 5 in turn deny killing Stephen Lawrence.
The reason you couldn't remember the Stephen Lawrence murder was because you were guilty.
That's fair enough. You're entitled to your own opinion, and 99% of this country, in my opinion, believe the same thing, Martin.
Well, what alternatives
have they got? As long as I know in my
got?
heart the truth, that's all that counts, in my opinion. That's all that counts for me.
Today, the Lawrence family and their lawyers bitterly condemned the programme.
Lawrences themselves, as you know, are concerned that such a programme should be broadcast to give a platform to people who've never taken the opportunity before. So in that sense, it's a travesty.
It's not a platform. It's a tough, searching, relentlessly hostile interrogation. The 5 get a tougher time than they've had in any court of law.
The police, who are still looking into Stephen Lawrence's murder, were refused advance access to the programme, but they're now likely to ask again through the courts. Joe Andrews, ITN, Scotland Yard.
Interest rates came down again today for the 6th time in 7 months. They're now at their lowest for 5 years. The Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee voted to cut rates by 0.25%. The base rate is now 5.25%. Industry and the unions welcomed the cut as a boost to the economy, though it means savers will again lose out. The biggest lenders have so far held back from cutting their mortgage rates. Also today, the European Central Bank cut its base rate by 0.5% to 2.5%. The big supermarket chains are to be referred to the Competition Commission, the old Monopolies and Mergers Commission, for an investigation into whether they're fixing prices and profiteering. The Office of Fair Trading, which examined the profitability of Tesco, Sainsbury, Asda and Safeway, said today it wasn't satisfied with the results it got. According to a recent survey, British shoppers pay up to 40% more for everyday products than their European and American counterparts. Nominations for the elections to the new Welsh Assembly close today. Voting is 4 weeks away. Reporting from Cardiff, here's Tim Rogers.
Tonight, among the regeneration at the heart of Cardiff Bay, work goes on to add the finishing touches to the chamber of the Welsh Assembly. Seen here for the first time, this is where the road to devolution leads. Unlike Westminster, packed with new technology for the debates among the 60 members who will be elected here in a month's time. But the challenge facing all the politicians is how to sell the idea to a broadly apathetic electorate. Labour's leader in Wales, Alan Michael, expects to win a majority if he can persuade voters to turn out on the 6th of May. Second in the opinion polls, Plaid Cymru say they'll make gains from voters disaffected with Labour over its recent Welsh leadership contest. The Liberal Democrats hope to do well from the proportional representation system that will elect 20 additional members, as do the Tories, looking for a way back after being wiped out in Wales at the last general election.
For the politicians, this will be the prize, but for them all, the challenge that lies ahead is to make it one which will bring the campaign alive. Tim Rogers, ITN, Cardiff.
The Sinn Féin leadership tonight issued a statement strongly criticising last week's Hillsborough Declaration drafted by the British and Irish governments. Sinn Féin called it an unacceptable attempt to rewrite important parts of last year's Good Friday Agreement and said it would resist it when negotiations resume next week. It's the reference to IRA weapons that Sinn Féin is objecting to. In tonight's European football, Chelsea could only scrape a draw like Manchester United last night. This time it was the semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup and Chelsea, the holders, went behind in the first half. Here's Peter Staunton.
It was a strange first half. Chelsea laid siege to the Real goal. The man who kept them at bay, Carlos Roa, the Argentinian who broke English hearts with his penalty saves in that World Cup game. And it got worse. Mallorca's first serious raid produced the opening goal. A deft through ball, and Darney strode past a stranded De Hoy. The frustration went on, and even when the Real keeper was beaten, Desailly's header was off target. Chelsea upped the pace after the break and were rewarded with the equaliser. Flo just on a substitute, seizing on a rare defensive mistake. But the winner never came. Roa denied Vialli. The Chelsea manager won't be looking forward to the second leg. Peter Staunton, ITN Sport.
Confirmation then of the scoreline. Chelsea won, Real Mallorca won. In the other semi-final, Lokomotiv Moscow also drew 1-1 against Lazio. The second legs will be played on the 22nd of April and the final will be at Villa Park in Birmingham on the 19th of May. The Scotland captain and Coventry midfielder Gary McAllister walked out of the international game today. McAllister said he was going because of the abuse he got from some fans. The main news again, NATO is sending 8,000 ground troops to Albania to help with the humanitarian aid effort for the refugees from Kosovo. The Lawrence suspects broke their silence tonight and interest rates have been cut again. Now for a look at tomorrow's papers. The Times leads on NATO clearing the sky to get the US prisoners out of Serbia. The Telegraph leads on the story we reported earlier about the 8,000 NATO troops being sent to the Albania-Kosovo border to ease the plight of the refugees. The Mail's front page also reports that story. The Mirror splits its front page between the ITV interview with the Stephen Lawrence murder suspects, one of them claiming they're just lovable rogues, and a young orphan in Macedonia who wandered into a British Army sanctuary after being separated from her family. Back to another story in the Times about an armchair punter's weekend bonanza for the big sporting weekend that's coming up, which includes the Grand National, the FA Cup semi-finals, the Brazilian Grand Prix and Five Nations Rugby. And that's the news tonight. The ITV Evening News is at 6:30 tomorrow and we're back at 11. From all of us here, good night.